A teaser trailer for the new SpellForce game, Conquest of Eo, has been released, and I just had to make a video on it as soon as possible. So far, it's found its fair share of criticism, which is understandable to some extent, as this type of gameplay is different to the RTS-RPG mix the series is best known for, instead opting to be a turn-based strategy game akin to the Heroes of Might and Magic series. I won't really go into the gameplay too much here, as the footage seems to be from the game's alpha and a lot can still change. With that being said, I personally don't mind this at all. How could I? After all, I've been someone who has advocated for SpellForce to branch out into other genres in the past, specifically into a pure RPG. Yes, however, a turn-based strategy game can still slot in well into a fantasy setting like SpellForce. This all made me think about an interesting question. What makes SpellForce SpellForce? The answer to that may vary. Many would say it's the mix of RTS and RPG, which is a fair point. That's what the series was first known for. But to counter it, there are quite a few games, especially from the early 2000s, that had elements of both genres. So instead, I would argue that it's the story, the universe the game takes place in. Gameplay can be shared by a lot of games, but there's only one world where this gameplay is utilized. With that in mind, I think it would be great for the SpellForce universe to eventually branch out into different types of games. Take for example the Warhammer 40k universe. You have real-time strategy games, RPGs, heck, even tabletops, but they are all part of Warhammer and each adds something to its lore. SpellForce isn't a stranger to this either. The releases of SpellForce 1 and 2 were accompanied by card games that presented fans with different types of mediums that they can use to experience the world. So, with all this taken into consideration, I think that this new game has a lot of potential, but that doesn't mean that a few things don't have me worried. One of the big pitfalls and major point of criticism of SpellForce 3 were the countless lore breaks that contradicted the canon, and the game did suffer for it. A lot of people chose not to bother with it because, as we discussed earlier, they wanted to play SpellForce for SpellForce, they didn't want to play a fanfiction. The silver lining for SpellForce 3, however, was the fact that in terms of gameplay, it still leaned into the mix of RTS and RPG, meaning that those fans who liked this type of gameplay in particular were still able to enjoy the game. But this is something that Conquest of Eo cannot rely on. From the perspective of most, if not all fans, they are looking for something in this game to connect them to the SpellForce they played over a decade ago, and it won't be the gameplay, so the only thing left is the story. Hence, I cannot stress enough how important it is for this game to have a story that fits with the canon SpellForce lore. A story that finally, since Dragonstorm in 2007, gives us more insight into the world we love so much. The trailer doesn't give us a lot to work with when it comes to the story, as the only thing it really mentions is the fact that you're an apprentice, returning to your master after years of travel. You find that he's disappeared and set out to use the knowledge he left behind to become one of the most powerful mages of your time. There is inherently nothing wrong with this premise, but it depends on when the events of the story take place. The main character seems to be human, which narrows it down to anywhere from 1000 BC until around 518 BC. Why these years in particular is because humans still lived in caves 1000 years before the Convocation. It was only then when the dwarves found them and helped them become civilized, and 518 before the Convocation because after the Circle had been established by all major races in unison, Eo entered a golden era without any major conflicts, which lasted until the Convocation Wars. That's not to say that there were no quarrels on Eo during that time, but the name Conquest of Eo suggests something fairly large scale, which would break canon as the Circle Mages were there to prevent such conflicts in the first place. I'm eliminating the possibility of this taking place post-Convocation since we see a map that shows Eo is still whole. Furthermore, we see trolls in the trailer, and they weren't created by Zorach until 850 BC, but something else to consider is that they don't arrive on Viara, which is what I'm assuming this continent is, until 100 years later, meaning that the time this game must take place in is between the years 750 BC and around 530 BC, making the setting either during the War of the Six Races or immediately after it. Both of these settings would be a good fit, but to save you some time, here's what I think would work perfectly. Have the game set around the year 540 BC with our protagonist being one of the future Circle Mages. There are two in particular that we know very little about, Undergast the Weaver and the Piper. Either could work. The events of the game will then depict our character rising the ranks as a mage, something that the trailer implies to be the case, until they eventually become very influential due to the deeds they accomplished in the game. Mages and their conflicts were common at this point. During this time, all Eo was in a phase called Mage Wars, with many mages causing uprisings and such. This would eventually lead to the races establishing the Circle in 518 BC from prevented from happening again. The Circle mages were chosen as the representatives of those races and were the best and brightest they had to offer, and our main character, let's say it's Undergas for the sake of this argument, is chosen by the humans due to proving himself to be one of the best mages out there during the events of Conquest of Eo. This would not only perfectly slot into the lore, it would also give us a lot of background information about a Circle mage we know next to nothing about. By no means is this the only setting, but I think it would be a shame to miss such a great opportunity. Apart from that, I'm wondering where this city here is meant to be located. It seems to be surrounded by the sea on both sides, but then upon checking the map, I can't really figure out where it would go. Some would say that such little details are nitpicky, but I disagree. Besides, paying attention to details like that is kind of what I do. In any case, I'm genuinely looking forward to this game as it has the potential to finally get the canon of SpellForce back on track while giving us loads of info on things we've been dying to know more about. I'll certainly play the game, analyze the story and point out any and all things breaking canon should there be some, but I'll remain optimistic that it won't be necessary. Let me know what you think. Are you looking forward to Conquest of Eo, or if not, what would it have to do to pique your interest? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon. Bye!